A veteran on the brink of ruin, a mystery buried in the swamp, and a horse bearing the mark of destiny will turn the tides. In the brutal horse racing arena of 1870, Virginia James Callahan, a 45-year-old ex-cavalryman, is crushed by debt and scorn. But from the shadows, Tempest, a gaunt, wild horse, with a Cherokee double swirl mark, awakens the legend of the wind horses. Salvation or deadly trap. With only a fading legacy to guide him, James dives headfirst into a battle where truth is twisted and courage is everything. Will he rise from the ashes or be trampled beneath the hooves of greed? Subscribe now to Ride into the Legend, where every hoofbeat echoes with freedom and truth. The Virginia twilight bled crimson, painting the scarred fields in hues of fire and shadow. In 1875, the land still bore the Civil War's wounds, shattered fences, blackened barns, and a quiet heavy with unspoken grief. On the outskirts of Richmond, James Callahan's farm stood defiant, its weathered planks creaking like an old soldier's bones. The air was thick with damp earth and fading hay, a fragile echo of days when hope thrived. Inside the farmhouse, James 45 sat by the hearth, firelight flickering across his rugged face. A bullet scar on his left shoulder pulsed in the chill, a Confederate ghost from Antietam, where his friend Nate's scream had pierced the chaos as he fell blood-soaking the earth. Once, a cavalry officer, James had poured his heart into raising racehorses, chasing the legacy of his father, a revered trainer who'd ridden with Cherokee horsemen. But every horse he bred crumbled against the titans of Ashwood stables, owned by the arrogant Gideon Ashwood. Debts piled high, the farm teetered on ruin, and the town's scorn was a blade. Callahan's finished, they muttered, at the feed store. Even Amos, a weathered neighbor, who'd once toasted James's early wins, now turned away, grumbling about wasted dreams. Gideon's barbs cut deeper. A broken dreamer, nothing else. Yet the sharpest pain came from Eliza, his wife, her hands hardened by toil. In the dim kitchen, her voice quavered. James, we can't survive on dreams. The bank's coming for us. Her eyes, once alight with love, now held dread. James gripped his father's leather journal, its pages worn, inked with tales of Cherokee wind horses, marked by a double swirl, said to run with the spirit of freedom. His grandfather, a trader who'd shared fires with Cherokee elders, spoke of their power to guide lost souls. James traced the faded sketch, his chest tight. He heard his father's voice. Believe in miracles, son, even when the world spits in your face. But with the farm crumbling and Eliza's faith fraying, James questioned his worth. He stepped onto the porch, the night swallowing the fields. A distant wolf's howl rode the wind, and he touched the leather cord around his neck, etched with a Cherokee wind symbol, a heirloom from his father born of his grandfather's bonds with the tribe. That morning Amos had stopped by his tone. Bitter Banks, sniffing around James, should have quit when you had the chance. The words stung a reminder of his isolation. James shut his eyes, seeing Nate's face in Antietam's mud, hearing his final gasp. Keep going, Jim. He'd outlived the war. But this fight against debt ridicule and his own faltering heart felt like a losing battle. The journal lay heavy in his hands, its promise of wind horses a faint ember in the dark. He murmured to the stars, "Give me something." But the wind only sighed, carrying the weight of his failures. Tempest, the spark that would ignite his redemption, waited unseen in a Petersburg stable, its double swirl hidden beneath mud and neglect. The wind howled through Petersburg, Virginia, a biting November gust that churned dust around the ramshackle warehouse hosting the 1875 horse auction. The air reeked of coal smoke, horse sweat, and the faint tang of desperation. Inside the crowd, a mix of silk-clad traders and weathered farmers hummed with restless energy, their voices echoing off the tin roof. James Callahan sapiled through the door, his frayed hat pulled low boots, leaving muddy streaks. He hadn't come to bid, only to flee the suffocating scorn of Richmond, where his name was a synonym for failure. In his coat pocket, his father's leather journal pressed against his ribs, its pages etched with tales of Cherokee wind. Horses, wild creatures marked by a double swirl, said to outrun the wind itself. His grandfather, a trader who'd shared pipes with Cherokee elders, swore they carried lost souls to salvation. The auction erupted, sleek stallions prancing under flickering oil lamps, their coats polished to a sheen. Gideon Ashwood, resplendent in a tailored coat, bid with a predator's grin, his wealth unchallenged. Whispers snaked through the crowd. Another horse gone at Ashwood, fourth this year. Something's rotten. James's ears pricked the rumor stirring unease, but no one dared speak the name behind it. Then a scrawny colt was dragged from the back, its gray coat caked in mud ribs, jutting like a broken cage. One leg limped, but its eyes burned fierce and untamed, sweeping the room with defiance. Stray. Unclaimed $5, the auctioneer rasped. Laughter exploded. Firewood on hooves, a trader bellowed. Gideon smirked. Not worth the dirt. It's standing on. James edged closer, heart thudding. The lamplight caught a double swirl on the colt's flank, a mirror of his father's sketch. Memories surged his grandfather's voice by a Cherokee fire, weaving tales of wind horses that raced storms. $10, James called, voice trembling. The crowd stilled, then snickered. Ezra, a grizzled horse trader who'd drunk with his father, shook his head. Your pa'd curse you, boy, throwing coin at that wreck. Gideon's eyes glinted. Callahan's finally snapped. James's hand shook, clutching the journal. He saw Eliza's tear-streaked face, the bank's looming shadow, his string of losses. But the swirl was a beacon, a whisper from his bloodline. 15, he shouted, then 20. Silence fell, heavy iron. The colt was his. He named it Tempest, a storm to shatter his despair. Leading the colt out, he braced against the jeers. Gideon sauntered over, voice laced with venom. You'll be begging by spring, Callahan. Don't weep when your wife walks out, Ezra muttered. Fools bet. James touched Tempest's neck, feeling a faint, stubborn pulse. The rumor of Ashwood's dead horses lingered, a dark thread he couldn't grasp. At home, Eliza's fury awaited. You've doomed us, she cried, her voice splintering. James fingered the leather cord around his neck, its Cherokee wind symbol, a cold anchor. Tempest stood in the shadowed stable, eyes locked on him as if sensing their shared defiance. Somewhere a man named Silas Crow, tied to Ashwood's secrets, sharpened his nails, but James didn't yet know the storm. He'd awakened. Dawn crept over the Callahan farm, its frail light slipping through the cracked planks of the stable, casting motes of dust in a hazy glow. The Virginia air, sharp with dew, and the faint sweetness of hay, clung to the crumbling homestead, a patchwork of splintered fences and a sagging roof that mirrored James Callahan's fading hopes. He rose before the sun boots, thudding on warped floorboards, the ache in his bullet-scarred shoulder. A quiet nag. In the stable, Tempest stood his gray coat, less tattered, the double swirl mark on his flank catching the light. His limping leg, though bandaged, held steady, and his eyes fierce, yet knowing, watched James with an uncanny patience. James knelt beside the colt, his father's leather journal open on the straw-strewn floor, its pages worn and inked with Cherokee wisdom. Held a recipe 50% alfalfa, 30% Timothy, 20% wild mint, a blend his father had learned from a Cherokee healer to nourish not just the body, but the spirit. James mixed the feed with a soldier's precision, hands steady as if loading a rifle under fire. "Here, boy," he murmured, sliding the manger forward. Tempest sniffed, then nibbled each bite, a small defiance against his frail frame. James tested signals. A raised left hand, a lowered right, and marveled as the colt responded, ears twitching, steps halting with a discipline that felt almost human. "You're no ordinary stray," he said, a flicker of awe in his voice. But the stable's quiet was shattered by a harsh knock at the gate. Mr. Harrow, the bank's agent, loomed in his black coat, his voice like gravel. "Callahan, you're 4 months behind. Pay by spring, or this land's ours." James's jaw clenched, the weight of debt pressing harder than any bullet. "You'll get it," he said, voice flat. Harrow's eyes flicked to Tempest, a sneer curling his lip. With that half-dead nag, "You're delusional." He stalked off, leaving James staring at the rotting fence. Gideon Ashwood's taunt washed-up dreamer ringing in his ears. Eliza watched from the farmhouse window, her hands chapped from scrubbing floors to keep their home afloat. She'd once hung on James's stories of cavalry charges and his father's horses, but now fear dulled her gaze. Yet seeing him with Tempest, his hands gentle, his focus unwavering, she felt a stir of the old faith. She turned away, blinking back tears, unwilling to let him see her waver. In the yard, Sam, their young farmhand, who'd once worked at Ashwood stables, lingered, his face uneasy. "Boss, I heard things at Ashwood," he whispered. "Horses dying in the night. No explanation. Someone's hiding it." James's eyes narrowed. The Petersburg rumor of Ashwood's dead horses resurfacing a shadow he couldn't yet name. He returned to Tempest, brushing the colt's flank, the leather cord around his neck etched with a Cherokee wind symbol, cool against his skin. "We'll show 'em, won't we?" he said, but doubt gnawed. The farm was a husk. Eliza's hope was fraying, and Harrow's threat loomed like a noose. Sam's warning about Ashwood echoed, hinting at a danger beyond Gideon's scorn. James sat by the hearth that night, the journal open on his lap, its tales of wind horses, guiding warriors through darkness. A faint beacon. He traced the double swirl sketch, seeing his father's steady hands, hearing his voice. Believe even when it hurts. But Eliza's silence and the bank's shadow weighed heavier. Tempest's soft whinny cut through the dark. A call to keep fighting. James gripped the cord, praying for the strength to carry a legacy he feared he'd break. The Virginia night shimmered under a swollen moon, its silver glow threading through the gnarled oaks of Great Dismal Swamp. The air was thick with the reek of moss and stagnant water. The swamp, a labyrinth of black pools and spectral mists, revered by the Cherokee as sacred, feared by others as cursed. James Callahan followed Tempest. The gray Schultz steps urgent, his double swirl mark glinting despite the mud caking his coat. Tempest moved with a purpose James couldn't fathom, nose flaring as if drawn by an ancient call. James, honed by cavalry skirmishes, gripped the reins, his dagger sheathed at his belt. The leather cord around his neck, etched with a Cherokee wind symbol, pulsed like a heartbeat, echoing his father's tales of wind horses, beasts that carried the wind's spirit, guiding warriors through shadow. The swamp was a living trap. Mud sucked at James's boots each step, a wrestle with the earth. Roots snagged his legs, and he nearly plunged into a hidden bog, the icy water clawing at his knees before he scrambled free. A wolf's howl sliced the silence, too close, sending a shiver down his spine. Tempest paused, eyes blazing, urging him deeper. James's hand brushed the dagger, his pulse quickening. He recalled his grandfather's stories told by Cherokee fires of wind, horses, navigating such wilds, their hooves silent as whispers. "Where are you leading me, boy?" He breathed the wind, swallowing his words. The path twisted into a dry clearing, moonlight pooling like molten silver. There stood a towering mare, her silver gray coat radiant, a double swirl mark stark on her flank. Her eyes fierce and fathomless, locked onto James, her hooves scraping the earth in warning. Tempest whinnied, a cry of joy and reunion. This was her mother, a true wind horse. James named her Zephyr, after the gales his father swore could outrun storms. But Zephyr was no tame creature. She snorted ears pinned, poised to charge. James stood rooted hands, raised palms open as his father had learned from Cherokee horsemen. "I'm not your enemy," he said, voice steady, a soldier calming a spooked mount. He held up the leather cord, its wind symbol catching the moonlight. Zephyr's ears flicked, but she held her ground, a queen guarding her realm. Over days, James returned, braving the swamp's perils, a near miss with a snapping turtle, the eerie wail of a bobcat. He brought alfalfa, standing at a distance speaking softly, of his grandfather's trade with the Cherokee Tempest, lingered near his whinnies, a bridge between man and mare. One night under a full moon, Zephyr stepped forward, her nose brushing the cord. James's breath hitched, awe flooding him. "You're real," he whispered, eyes gleaming. In the clearing, he spotted a tree scarred with a faint Cherokee wind symbol, like his cords, as if carved by an elder Tsisgili, perhaps the name his father once mentioned. The swamp's dangers pressed closer. A branch snapped, and James spun dagger, half drawn, sensing eyes in the dark. Zephyr was his salvation, but also a trial. Doubt crept in. Could he tame her, Or would she be another broken dream? The memory of Antietam, of Nate's bloodied face, clawed at him. He feared failing his father's legacy, leaving Eliza with nothing. Tempest nudged his shoulder, grounding him, his gaze steady as if to say, "Keep going." The swamp whispered secrets, and James felt the weight of a path only begun. Zephyr's breath warmed his hand, a wind. Horses' promise, but the darkness held threats he couldn't yet see. In the shadowed heart of Ashwood stables, where lamplight flickered like a dying pulse, the air choked with the stench of blood and acrid chemicals, Silas Crow, 35, stood amid the stalls, his gaunt frame, taut eyes glinting like frost under a battered hat. In his grip, a baseball bat studded with nails dripped crimson, its jagged tips catching the dim glow. Before him, a skeletal chestnut horse once. Ashwood's rising star collapsed on the filth-strewn floor, its coat streaked with gore. "Weakness is death," Silas' snarled voice, a low rasp raw with contempt. He swung the bat, the crack of bone swallowed by the horse's agonized scream. The other horses shrank back, silent, their eyes hollow, as if they'd learned to dread his wrath. Silas had been a prodigy. Once, a boy of 20, whose gift for horses drew awe across Virginia. Under a Cherokee elder's tutelage, he'd learned to read a horse's soul, its fear in a flicked ear, its trust in a steady breath. But ambition poisoned him. He'd tried to tame a wind horse, a colt with a double swirl mark, dreaming of glory. It threw him, shattering his pride, and the elder's rebuke. "You seek power, not harmony," cut deeper than the fall. Caught cheating in a Richmond race, Silas lost all his name, his kin, his dreams shunned. He crawled to Gideon Ashwood, who offered redemption for a price. His soul. Now, Silas was Gideon's blade, injecting illegal muscle drugs into horses, forging champions. When the drugs failed, his bat delivered judgment, each blow a scream against the world that cast him out. He loathed Gideon, who sneered at him like a stray, but loathed himself more for betraying the elder's teachings. Horses are the earth's spirit, not man's tools. Each swing buried his shame, yet fueled his rage. That night, cleaning the bat's nails, Silas overheard a groom's whisper. James Callahan, a washed-up fool, had a colt with a double swirl, and its mother, a mare in the swamp, was said to be a wind horse. Silas froze, the elder's words echoing. Wind, horses bearers of freedom, chosen by the worthy. He'd failed to claim one. Now Callahan, a nobody like him, dared to succeed where he'd fallen. The thought was a knife, twisting in his gut. Silas's fingers clenched the bat, his pulse a drumbeat. He saw the elder's disappointed gaze, heard Gideon's balking laugh, felt the wind horse's rejection. Years ago. "No," he hissed. "Callahan won't steal this." He burned to crush James. Not just for Gideon, whose black thunder faced ruin if the mare ran, but to prove he wasn't the failure. The world named him. He drew a syringe from his coat, its yellow poison glinting a venom to drive a horse mad. Under the moon, he set out for Great Dismal Swamp, where Callahan's Zephyr roamed. The elder's warning haunted him. Betrayers are swept by the wind, Silas shoved it down his obsession. A fire no reason could quench. James Callahan would learn no one. Outshone Silas Crow, not with a wind horse, not ever. The Virginia night pressed down like a shroud, heavy with the scent of pine and sodden earth. At the Callahan farm, moonlight carved sharp shadows across the splintered stable, its warped planks groaning in the wind. James Callahan stirred in his sleep, dreams tangled with Antietam's blood and Nate's final cry. A sharp crack snapped him awake, wood shattering, followed by Tempest's piercing whinny. He bolted upright, dagger in hand, boots hitting the floor as he raced to the stable. The door hung crooked hinges torn, and inside, Tempest reared eyes wild with panic. Zephyr tethered. In the shadows, snorted hooves, gouging the dirt. On the straw-littered floor lay a crude wooden horse, its flank stabbed with a rusty nail, a chilling omen. James's heart hammered the leather cord around his neck, etched with a Cherokee wind symbol, cool against his chest. He scanned the darkness, every instinct honed by cavalry, raids screaming of danger. Muddy footprints snaked from the stable, leading toward the forest. He followed Dagger, gleaming, moving low, like a scout behind enemy lines. The trail wound through brambles, ending at a taut rope, strung between pines. A tripwire rigged to cripple. James stepped over it, breath shallow. The Petersburg rumor of Ashwood's dead horses clawing at his mind. Near the tree line, he found a syringe, its yellow liquid glinting under the moon, and a torn scrap of cloth reeking of chemicals. Silas Crow. The name Sam had whispered felt closer now. A predator circling. Back at the farmhouse, Eliza met him, her face ashen shawl clutched tight. "James, what's out there?" she asked, voice trembling. He showed her the wooden horse, its nail glinting cruelly. "Someone wants Zephyr gone," he said, voice low, steady, despite the fear gnawing within Eliza's eyes. Hardened fear yielding to defiance. "We won't let them." Her resolve startled him. A spark of the woman who'd once believed in his dreams. James tucked the syringe and cloth into a tin box, evidence of an enemy he couldn't yet face. At dawn, he rode to Richmond's tavern seeking whispers. The air was thick with ale and suspicion. But when he mentioned Ashwood, eyes darted away. Sam, lingering by the bar, leaned close. "It's Silas Crow. Boss, they say he breaks horses and men for Gideon." James's fists clenched the nail-pierced toy, a vivid scar in his memory. Sam's warning tied the syringe to Ashwood's shadow, to the rumors of slaughtered horses. He returned home, finding Eliza by the stable. Her gaze softer now. "I saw you with Tempest last night," she said, voice quiet. "You're not quitting, are you?" James shook his head, touching the leather cord. "Not while they're counting on me." But Dow oiled tighter the bank's deadline. Gideon's venom, and now Silas's unseen blade. Could he shield Zephyr? Tempest? Eliza Tempest's steady gaze met his, a silent urging to fight. James murmured, "We'll catch him, boy." But the forest's silence mocked him, hiding a foe who struck from the dark. The great dismal swamp loomed under a dawn, cloaked in mist, its twisted oaks and black waters breathing secrets older than memory. James Callahan moved through the mire, dagger at his belt, the muddy footprints from the stable attack guiding him. The syringe and torn cloth stashed in his coat burned like embers, proof of Silas Crow's malice. His cavalry-honed senses screamed of peril. Every rustle, every shadow could be a trap. The swamp's air was heavy with rot and moss, broken only by the harsh caw of a crow. The leather cord around his neck, its Cherokee wind symbol, felt like a talisman, tethering him to his father's tales of wind horses, navigating such forsaken places. The trail snaked deeper, mud clinging to James's boots like a living thing. A faint glint caught his eye. A second tripwire, thinner, rigged with a sharpened stake. He sidestepped, heart-pounding Silas's cunning, clear in every step. The path opened to a clearing near Ashwood stables, where a sickly stench hit him. A shallow pit gaped, piled with horse carcasses, their hides marred by nail wounds, eyes glassy in death. James staggered, bile rising. The sight dragged him back to Antietam. Nate's bloodied face, the screams of the fallen. He knelt, retrieving a rusted nail, its weight a vow. This was Silas's work, a butcher's gallery. Doubt clawed at him. Could he face a man this cruel, or Gideon's power behind him? A twig snapped, James spun, dagger drawn, and two of Gideon's men burst from the trees, knives flashing. He dodged a slash, his training kicking in, and drove his fist into one's jaw. The other lunged, blade grazing his arm. Blood welling, James kicked him back, sprinting into the swamp's maze. Their curses fading, in the fog gasping. He reached the farm, mud-soaked and shaken. Eliza waited, her face pale. "You're bleeding," she said, grabbing a cloth. James shook his head, showing the nail. "It's Silas Crow. He's slaughtering horses to hide Gideon's thefts." Her eyes widened, but she nodded resolve. Stealing her. "We need more than this." Eliza had been hunting, slipping into Richmond to meet Hannah, a former Ashwood groom. Under a market stall, Hannah whispered of Silas's savagery. Horses drugged, beaten, buried to conceal Gideon's plunder of Cherokee bloodlines. Eliza's heart raced as she scrawled notes. Silas's shadow passing inches away, his boots crunching gravel. She ducked behind a wagon, breath held escaping by a thread. Now she handed James the notes. "This proves it," she said, voice fierce. Yeah, James stared at the nail, guilt surging. He'd pulled Eliza into this danger, risking her for his fight. "If I fail, we're done," he said, voice cracking. Eliza gripped his arm. "We're together, James. That's enough." The pit's horror lingered, a mirror of his own fragility. He saw Nate's lifeless eyes, felt the farm's collapse looming. The leather cord weighed heavy, its wind symbol, a faint echo of wind. Horses guiding warriors. Tempest whinnied from the stable. Zephyr's steady snort joining in their trust. A lifeline. James clutched Eliza's notes, the nail a grim promise. Silas was close, his cruelty. A storm gathering. But James would not break, not yet. The swamp's whispers followed him, urging him to fight, even as doubt whispered he might fall. Sunlight spilled across the Callahan farm, a rare golden warmth bathing the Virginia fields, coaxing wildflowers from the cracked earth. The stable, though patched and leaning, stood defiant, a testament to James Callahan's stubborn resolve. He trained Zephyr daily, the mare's silver coat blazing her double swirl mark a living sigil of Cherokee legend. Her strides were liquid fire, each hoofbeat a pulse of power, responding to James's signals, subtle shifts of weight, a low whistle with an intelligence that felt almost sacred. Tempest watched his own swirl-marked flank, healing his gaze, steady as a sentinel. Yet Richmond's disdain clung like damp rot. At the feed store, traders scoffed. Callahan's betting on a swamp beast. Amos, the neighbor who'd once shared whiskey with James's father, snorted Gideon. "We'll bury him at the Derby." James brushed Zephyr, the leather cord, around his neck, its Cherokee wind symbol cool against his skin. The bank's deadline loomed, Mr. Harrow's threat, a noose. Tightening Silas Crow's nail-pierced warning, and the swamp's grisly pit haunted him. A reminder of the enemy stalking Zephyr alive. Now his partner in this fight. Hammered nails into a sagging fence. Her hands steady, despite the danger she'd faced. "I was wrong to doubt you," she said, her voice soft but firm, meeting his eyes. "Keep fighting." Their shared purpose mended the rift of months past. But James's fear for her safety gnawed deeper after her near miss with Silas. Her courage slipping through Richmond's shadow to gather Hannah's notes was a flame he both admired and dreaded. That evening, a figure emerged from the dusk, an elderly Cherokee man, Tsiskili, his face carved by time, eyes deep as the swamp itself. "I heard of your mare," he said, voice like stone, worn smooth. "Wind, horse choose their riders. They carried my people through storms." He handed James a stone, its surface etched with a wind symbol, edges smoothed by generations. "She'll guide you, but beware the betrayer." James clutched the stone, its weight grounding him. Tsiskili's words stirred memories of his grandfather's tales of wind horses outrunning tempests, their spirits bound. To the earth he thought of Silas, the Cherokee-trained butcher, and a chill traced his spine. Tsiskili knelt kindling a small fire, its flames fed by alfalfa stalks. The smoke curled upward, a prayer to the wind horses. Its scent sharp and clean. "Honor her," he said, nodding toward Zephyr, who stood watchful in the corral. James felt the burden of his legacy, his grandfather's trade, his father's journal. Now this elder's trust. The stone and leather cord were anchors, but fear surged. Could he shield Zephyr from Silas's poison, or would he fail Eliza Tempest and the Cherokee spirit entrusted to him? "What if I'm not enough?" he asked, voice low. Tsiskili's gaze held to him. "The wind tests, but it also lifts." Tempest limped to James's side, his wound nearly healed, eyes fierce with loyalty. Zephyr's snort echoed, a call to battle. James whispered to them, "We're not alone." The fire's glow lit Tsiskili's face, and James saw his father's resolve mirrored there. The Virginia Derby loomed a crucible where Zephyr would run or fall. Silas's shadow stretched along, his syringe and bat waiting in the dark. James gripped the stone, its wind symbol a vow. The farm, fragile but alive, stood ready, and the wind carried a faint chant, urging him to rise. Richmond's town square pulsed with the pre-Derby fervor lanterns, casting a warm, amber glow over cobblestones slick with evening dew. The air hummed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the restless snort of horses tethered nearby. James Callahan led Zephyr through the throng, her silver coat shimmering the double swirl mark on her flank, a quiet challenge. Every eye turned, some with curiosity, most with mockery. Callahan's swamp nag won't last a furlong. A trader jeered. Ale-sloshing Amos, the grizzled neighbor, shook his head. Gideon's black thunder'll grind him to dust. James's blood simmered, but Eliza's steady hand on his arm anchored him. She carried Hannah's notes scrawled, proof of Ashwood's crimes, her eyes fierce. "We'll finish this tonight," she whispered. Gideon Ashwood, flanked by hired men in tailored coats, stood at the squares, heart his smirk a blade. "Save your tears. For the poorhouse, Callahan," he called, voice dripping venom. The crowd parted their whispers a tide. Some swayed by James's defiance, others loyal to Gideon's gold. James stepped forward, the leather cord around his neck, its Cherokee wind symbol, steadying his pulse. He raised the rusted nail from the swamp's pit, its bloodstain glinting. "Silas Crow, your man drugs and slaughters horses," he declared, voice cutting through the din. "He tried to kill, mine to hide your theft of Cherokee stock." Murmurs swelled, heads turning. But Gideon laughed, sharp and cold. Delusional ravings from a desperate fool. Eliza moved beside James, her notes trembling in her grip. "We have proof," she said, voice clear as a bell. Witnesses saw Silas's cruelty horses beaten, buried to cover Gideon's greed. She held up the pages, Hannah's words detailing Ashwood's sins. The crowd wavered, some nodding, recalling the Petersburg rumors of dead horses. Others tied to Gideon's purse scoffed. A woman in the back, her face weathered, shouted, "Let's hear it." Gideon's smile twitched, but he sneered, "Prove it, or crawl back to your ruin." James's heart sank without Silas in chains. Their evidence was thin, a spark, not yet a fire. That night Silas struck. Under a moonless sky, he crept to the Callahan stable, hurling stones at Zephyr's stall. Tempest, ever vigilant, lunged to shield her, a jagged rock gashing his flank. James, woken by the colt's cry, raced out, rage boiling. He bandaged Tempest's wound, hands shaking, guilt choking him. "I failed you, boy," he whispered, the colt's steady gaze a rebuke. Eliza knelt beside him, her touch firm. "You're not failing. Fight for them." Her words were a lifeline, but doubt surged. Could Zephyr outrun Black Thunder, or would Silas's shadow claim them all? James sat by the stable, the Cherokee stone from Tsiskili, heavy in his palm. The elder's warning, "Beware." The betrayer rang clear. Silas's Cherokee roots, a twisted mirror of his own. He saw Antietam's blood, felt the farm's fragility, heard Eliza's plea. "If we lose tomorrow, it's over," he told her, voice raw. She gripped his hand, eyes blazing. "Then we won't lose." Zephyr stood tall, her snort a call to war, her double swirl a beacon. The wind stirred, carrying Tsiskili's chant, and James felt his father's spirit in its gust. The Derby was hours away, and Silas lurked, his poison ready. James clutched the stone, vowing to run, to fight, to win for Zephyr, for Tempest, for the wind, horses, unbroken soul. The Virginia Derby blazed under a relentless sun, Richmond's grandstand, a sea of hats and banners, dust swirling like a restless spirit. The air thrummed with cheers, the sharp crack of whips, and the thunder of hooves. James Callahan astride. Zephyr felt the weight of every gaze. Scornful traitors, hopeful outcasts, skeptical townsfolk. The mare's silver coat gleamed her double swirl. Mark a defiant sigil. Her eyes locked on the track. Black Thunder, Gideon. Ashwood's champion loomed across the field, its muscles unnaturally swollen, a testament to Silas Crow's poisons. Gideon perched in the stands, sneered, but whispers of James's accusations, Silas's cruelty, Ashwood's thefts rippled through the crowd. A few voices, rough and earnest, chanted Callahan. Callahan, a fragile tide against the storm of doubt. James leaned low, his breath warm against Zephyr's ear. "This is our war girl," he whispered, the leather cord around his neck, its Cherokee wind symbol steadying his pulse. Tisgili's stone, tucked in his pocket, felt like a heartbeat. The starting gun split the air, and the field surged, a chaos of muscle and dust. James held Zephyr back, his cavalry instincts guiding him to pace her strength, a tactic honed in charges where timing meant survival. Black Thunder led its rider lashing fiercely. But James saw the strain, jerky strides, foam flecking its mouth, Silas's drugs pushing it beyond nature's edge. Zephyr moved like a river, her hooves a soft drumbeat conserving power. The crowd roared some jeering swamp nag, others shouting, "Go, Zephyr!" On the final lap, James felt Zephyr's rhythm shift, her muscles coiling. He eased forward, a slight press of his knees, and she exploded, a silver streak slicing through the pack. Black Thunder faltered, its rider cursing, and Zephyr surged past, neck stretched, eyes blazing. The finish line flashed beneath her, a heartbeat ahead. The grandstand erupted cheers, crashing like waves, drowning Gideon's furious shout. James dismounted, legs trembling, and pressed his forehead to Zephyr's, her breath hot and steady. "You did it," he murmured, tears stinging his eyes. Eliza ran from the sidelines, her embrace, fierce voice breaking. "You showed them all." But victory shattered in an instant. Silas Crow burst into the stable, eyes fevered, his nail-studded bat raised. "You won't take this," he screamed, swinging at Zephyr. James Dove tackling him, the bat grazing his shoulder, blood blooming. Zephyr reared safe. As Tempest charged his wounded flank, no match for his fury. Knocking Silas to the dirt, the bat clattered, free nails glinting. Spectators enraged by the attack surged forward, pinning Silas with shouts of monster and killer. The sheriff spurred by. Eliza's prior warnings clapped irons on Silas, his face a mask of rage and defeat. James knelt by Tempest, stroking the colt's bloodied flank. "You saved her, boy," he whispered, voice thick, the colt's loyal gaze a balm. The crowd's cheer faded to a hum, some still stunned, others chanting Zephyr's name. Gideon's ashen face vanished into the throng, his empire teetering. James held Tisgili's stone, its wind symbol warm, and felt Zephyr's strength beside him. A wind, horse unbroken. Eliza's hand found his, her eyes alight with pride. The stable buzzed with onlookers, some clapping James's shoulder. Their scorn turned to awe, but the fight wasn't done. Silas's confession and Eliza's evidence awaited a reckoning to topple Ashwood. The wind stirred, carrying Tsiskili's chant, and James knew the truth, like Zephyr's hooves, would thunder on. Richmond's town hall glowed under a constellation of torches, its oak doors groaning as a restless crowd packed the chamber, their murmurs a low roar. The air crackled with the Derby's aftershock. Zephyr's triumph, Silas Crow's violent outburst, and the whispers of Ashwood's crimes. James Callahan stood at the hall's heart, the weight of victory tempered by the battle ahead. Eliza beside him clutched Hannah's notes, her face a mask of resolve, her eyes fierce with purpose. Gideon Ashwood, flanked by nervous lackeys, glowered from the front, his tailored coat no shield against the tide turning. Tsiskili. The Cherokee elder sat in the back, his weathered face unreadable, the wind-carved stone in James's pocket. A silent vow. The sheriff pounded a gavel, calling for order, but the crowd's hunger for truth was a living thing. James stepped forward, the leather cord around his neck, its Cherokee wind symbol steadying his breath. He held up the rusted nail from the swamp's pit, its blood stain, a grim accusation. Silas Crow tried to kill my mare, he said, voice clear, cutting through the din. He slaughtered horses for Ashwood, hiding Gideon's theft of Cherokee bloodlines. The crowd stirred, some nodding, their memories stirred by the Petersburg rumors of dead horses. Others tied to Gideon's coin. Hissed, liar. Eliza raised Hannah's notes, her voice ringing. We have testimony, Hannah. A former Ashwood groom saw Silas drug horses beat them with a nailed bat to cover Gideon's greed. Hannah, trembling but defiant, stood. It's true, she said, voice shaking. Gideon ordered it to claim Cherokee stock as his own. Gideon surged to his feet, face crimson, slander Callahan's scraping for glory. His voice faltered as eyes turned cold, even his allies shifting uneasily. A woman in the crowd, her hands rough from fieldwork, shouted, Let's hear the truth. The sheriff signaled, and Silas was led in shackled, his gaunt face, hollow eyes darting like a trapped wolf. To lighten his sentence, he spoke, voice raw. Gideon paid me to dump a Cherokee mare in the swamp. Her and her foal. Said it'd secured his claim. I drugged. Horses killed the weak too. Tied at gasps. Rippled some, crying, Monster. Tsiskili's gaze burned, his silence heavy with the pain of a stolen legacy. Gideon lunged towards Silas, fists clenched. Traitor, he roared. But the sheriff's men restrained him. Eliza produced a ledger snatched from Ashwood's office during her covert search, its pages listing payments to Silas for disposal. The hall erupted, voices clashing, some demanding Gideon's ruin, others his loyalists shouting defiance. James met Tsiskili's eyes, nodding. This is for your people too, he said softly. The elder's hand grazed his shoulder, a blessing forged in shared loss. The sheriff declared Gideon charged with fraud and cruelty, his stables stripped, his name shattered. The crowd's roar was a tide sweeping away Ashwood's round. Outside, under a starlit sky, James and Eliza embraced their bond, reforged in fire. We did it, she whispered, tears glinting. James held Tsiskili's stone, its wind symbol warm, and felt Zephyr's spirit in the breeze. The hall emptied, voices fading, but Tsiskili lingered, his gaze on the horizon. The wind horses run again, he said, voice low. James nodded, vowing to honor their legacy. The fight had cost them blood, fear nearly their home, but it had won them truth. The wind carried a faint chant, and James knew the path ahead, though hard was theirs to forge. Spring draped the Callahan farm in a vibrant quilt of wildflowers, their colors a quiet rebellion against the Virginia earth's scars. A year after the Derby, the homestead stood renewed, its fences mended, though patches of weathered wood betrayed its battles. James Callahan leaned against a new gate, its surface carved with a Cherokee wind symbol, a gift from Tsisgilly, the elder whose wisdom had guided them. The air was sweet with alfalfa and blooming clover, but debts lingered, forcing James to sell a cherished pasture to settle the bank's claim. The sacrifice stung, yet the farm thrived, or born as a Callahan horsemanship, a sanctuary for rescued horses and wounded souls rooted in the Cherokee compassion. Tsisgilly had taught. Zephyr and Tempest roamed the pasture, their double swirl marks glinting like stars, guiding younger horses with gentle nudges. Zephyr's strides were a dance, her silver coat catching the sun, while Tempest, his flank scarred but strong, moved with quiet pride. Veterans, their eyes shadowed like James's from Antietam, found solace, here their hands steadying as they brushed manes, their laughter, a fragile echo of healing. Eliza, now teaching children to ride with kindness, caught James's eye across the field, her smile a beacon. Tsisgilly, a frequent visitor, shared tales of wind horses, his voice weaving past and present. "You've honored them," he said, pressing a new wind-carved stone into James's palm, its edges smoothed by time. The sanctuary's birth hadn't been easy. Investors swayed by Zephyr's legend, offered coin, but skepticism lingered some in Richmond. Still called James a fool. Their scorn, a ghost of Gideon's reign. Tsisgilly had stood with them burning alfalfa in a Cherokee ritual, to bless the land, the smoke curling like a prayer. The wind carries truth, he'd said, and James felt it in the breeze, in the horses' steady breaths. The community rallied, too. A woman from the Derby crowd, her hands rough like Eliza's, brought her son to learn her gratitude. A quiet tide. Yet James knew the cost. Every nail hammered, every debt paid, was a fight to keep this haven alive. One evening, as the sun sank, in a blaze of gold and crimson, James stood by the fence. The leather cord around his neck, warm against his skin. Tempest trotted over, nuzzling his shoulder, and Zephyr followed her gaze deep as the swamp that birthed her. The wind stirred, carrying Tsisgilly's chant, and James saw Antietam's blood, Nate's sacrifice, his father's journal, open on a hearth, long cold. "We found our path, didn't we?" he whispered, scratching Tempest's ear. The colt snorted, eyes bright, as if agreeing. Eliza's laughter rang from the stable, where she taught a shy girl to braid Zephyr's mane. The child's fear melting under the mare's calm. James held Tsisgilly's stone, its wind symbol, a vow etched in stone and soul. The farm, once a ruin, was now a light for veterans finding peace for horses, finding trust for a legacy reborn. He thought of Silas's bat, Gideon's fall, the swamp's grim pit. Each had tested him, but Zephyr's hooves, Tempest's courage, and Eliza's fire had carried them through. The horizon stretched wide, and James felt the wind horse's spirit, wild, free, eternal, in the gusts that swept the fields. Callahan horsemanship was no mere farm. It was a promise proof that even the shattered could rise lifted by the wind's unyielding grace.